It is hidden quite well, but there is a lot of symbolism surrounding Christ's death and resurrection. In fact, just now I noticed that the guy on the left is wearing all red, and the guy on the right is wearing all white. That's pretty interesting. You'll notice that that corresponds to the color of the moon and the color of the sun. The sun, of course, being red and the moon being white. And those of you who have studied alchemy may want to pay attention to that, because it's no accident. Now, there's a lot of other symbolism here. You have Christ with 33 years, and he died at Golgotha. He chose to die on a cross. And I say he chose because Christ came to earth to die. His death wasn't an accident, and he orchestrated all of the events surrounding his death purposefully. And yes, he chose to die on a cross. If he wanted to die some other way, he would have. He has a crown of thorns on. The sun and the moon are supposedly coming together for an eclipse. Now, the New Testament says there's a darkness over the land, but it's generally accepted that an eclipse occurred, and that's what caused the darkness. There's 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb, and there's 3 men right here on the 3 crosses. After his resurrection, he floated into the sky. And then you have John 3:14, which says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And that's just a little bit of the symbolism. Each one of those elements, very symbolic, and I'm going to go into detail now. There's a lot of different beliefs and theories about Christ. You know, there you have Christianity, Catholicism, LDS, even Islam believes that Jesus was a prophet, and Rastafari. There is astrotheology. And so with all these different beliefs, Christ Jesus can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people and can speak to people in different ways. So this is just some symbolism that I have found, and I'm not here to intrude upon your beliefs, just to say that this is what I found. And for me, it's beyond coincidental. And all of these elements, 33, Golgotha, the crown, the eclipse, 3 days, 3 nights, floating into the sky, all this stuff is beyond the realm of coincidence or accident, and it just all accidentally happened this way. The Son of God would be far too wise for this accident or all these coincidences to occur surrounding his death and resurrection. So that being said, I'm going to get right into it. And the first one that I'm going to start with, I think, is the 33 years. Now, turning to the New Testament for evidence of his age being 33 at death, we can see that in Luke 3:23, Jesus began his ministry at 30 years of age, and there are 3 recorded Passovers before his death on the 3rd one. The first Passover occurred in John 2:23, the second one in John 6:4, and the third is recorded in John 11:55, 12:1, 13:1, and so on. The third Passover was the one that occurred the night before Jesus died, and is the one that was recorded by all 4 gospel writers in conjunction with the Last Supper and the death of Jesus. So, that being said, Jesus must have died at the age of 33, and presumably that is the year 33 AD. Now, not getting into any of the Masonic symbolism of 33, what I am interested in is the spine. And of course, the spine has 33 vertebrae. And this is the symbolism of Christ's 33 years. And there is the elevating up the spine. So it would be the same as basically elevation in years from 0 to 33. The same happens from the spine, where you go from the first vertebrae up to the 33rd. And at the 33rd vertebrae, a death occurs. Just like with Christ at his 33rd year of life, a death occurred. Now, the spine is broken up into 5 different sections. There is the coccyx, the sacrum, the lumbar, the thoracic, and the cervical. And it's interesting that with the yoga chakras, they also correspond to these 5 different sections of spine. Here are the 7 chakras. The first 5 are located within the spine. The 6th is the pineal gland, or the mind's eye. And the 7th is actually outside of the body. It's above the body. And the 7th chakra represents essentially an out-of-body experience. So there are 6 chakras inside the body. One of them is inside of Golgotha, and 5 of them are along the spine. So I'm going to just change the color of the first 5 here and bring the spine back so that we can see the corresponding chakras to the section of spine. This is called the Muladhara chakra, or the root chakra, and that corresponds, of course, with this 4 fused vertebrae at the very bottom. And then there is the sacral chakra. Of course, that's the sacrum, which is 5 fused vertebrae here. The solar plexus chakra to the lumbar. And we have the heart chakra to the thoracic region of the spine, and the throat chakra, of course, for the cervical. On top of that, of course, you've got the skull, or Golgotha, and that is where the 6th chakra resides, with the pineal gland at the center of the brain. Now, as you can see, it's not easy to get the 33 years from the New Testament, but they're actually in there, and we do know that Christ died at 33 years old. And that is the symbolic meaning here of the 33 years of Christ. He chose to live for 33 years purposely, and those 33 years correspond to the 33 vertebrae of the spine. And as I hinted to previously, once you have elevated it up the 33 vertebrae, of course, you finally reach the 6th chakra, which is located in Golgotha. Matthew 27:33. Interesting that Matthew has Golgotha right after 33, just like Christ did. But they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. So Christ chose for his location of death to be the skull. Now, that is right on top of the 33. Of course, these 33 vertebrae of the spine support the skull, or Golgotha. So not only did Christ choose to live for 33 years, exactly corresponding to the number of vertebrae in the spine, he also chose to die at Golgotha. In Hatha, or Kundalini Yoga, the power that starts at the root chakra and goes all the way up through the 7th is called Kundalini. So Hatha and Kundalini Yoga are really quite similar and said to be synonymous. But Kundalini is laying dormant in 3.5 coils at the bottom of the spine. Now, I am using Gaddson's Kundalini snake here, so I've covered that flag in a different video, but the 3.5 coils with the 33 sections are quite obviously representing the spine, and the 1, 2, 3 loops are undeniable. But 3.5 times looped, we have Kundalini here at the base of the spine, which is lying dormant. Now, this is coming from kind of a mix of different historical texts, paintings, and scrolls, and all that. Some of it is from yoga, some of it's from Hinduism. Really, what it comes down to is the Vedas, and the Vedas include the Upanishads. And these historical religious texts predate Christ. So Christ going to all these different temples and studying religious texts would have likely had access to the Vedas and the Upanishads, and that's reflected by the words that Christ used. But when I speak of these concepts here, like Kundalini, these are from texts which predate Christ and that he was likely acquainted with. So when you turn to John 3:14, it says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man must be lifted up. The serpent being lifted up is Kundalini going up the 33 vertebrae until it reaches Golgotha. Now, that occurs at death. And when people talk about they're going towards a great light, or they're, of course, leaving their body at death, what is happening as you're approaching that great light is that Kundalini, which I'm not going to say is your spirit or soul, but from my best understanding, it aligns synonymously with the Holy Spirit. But whether you like it or not, you are going to raise the serpent, and in most cases, it only happens at death. And when you die, this Kundalini or Holy Spirit will go up the spine and out of the body, and the body will be dead. Now, what yoga teaches is to raise the Kundalini up 33 into Golgotha, and sometimes, like with the case of Lazarus, I've covered that in a previous video, Kundalini essentially could be raised to the 7th chakra and then brought back into the body and finally lowered down to the spine back to its resting spot where the human returns to normal. Now, the reason this is called a death and a rebirth, I'm going to cover shortly, but for one, death is when Kundalini leaves the body, and only through essentially some of these hatha yoga practices can it be elevated up into the skull, kept there for some period of time, and then brought back down. So when John 3:14 speaks of raising the serpent, and that the Son of Man must do this just like Moses did, obviously with Neshutan, that is the serpent being spoken of in John 3:14 is Kundalini, which lays dormant at the base of the spine in 3.5 coils. Next, I'm going to cover the cross. There is the cross. Let me turn on the 7 chakras, and you can see where the shape of the cross comes from. Now, this isn't going to make a lot of sense without Ida and Pingala, so I'm going to turn on Ida, which is moon, and Pingala, which is sun. And for the moment, I'll toggle off the 7 chakras But what happens here is Ida, which is white, or the moon, and Pingala, which is red, or the sun, crisscross supposedly at each chakra. And these are called milk and honey. Now, where they combine is up here at the sixth chakra. And you're going to notice something interesting here. The chakras going up have lotus flower petals. So 4 at the root, and then we've got 6 here, going up in number each time as you go up the 33 vertebrae of the spine. But something interesting happens at the 6th chakra. We're down to 2 lotus flower petals. Now, I've studied in the Veda and Upanishads and yogic text the answer as to why there are 2 lotus flowers here, and that they both are on the right and the left side, pointing outwards. These are the 2 ventricles that go into the pineal gland. The 6th chakra, of course, being the pineal gland. So, turning on the Ida and Pingala, milk and honey raise up and crisscross each other until they both enter in and drip into the pineal gland. And where they combine, that is the land of milk and honey. That's what yoga calls samadhi. But it's very clear in the ancient texts that the 6th chakra is a 2-petal lotus flower, the 2 petals going to the left and to the right, and representing the horizontal inputs of the Pingala and the Ida into the pineal gland. Now, from my best understanding, this is the historical meaning of the cross. And it lines up perfectly with the 7th chakra being above that. And so we have that, of course, portion above the cross, the Ida and the Pingala entering horizontally here. And the reason that each chakra exists here, or there's a spiritual experience at each chakra, is because the milk and honey is not combining, but the 2 tubes that are going up, they get so close to each other here that you have a profound spiritual experience. And that's, of course, each chakra. So when the milk and honey are just very close to each other inside of the body, you have a profound spiritual experience, each one getting stronger and stronger until finally they both pour into the pineal gland and mix together into the land of milk and honey, or what's called heaven, or samadhi. So that is the symbol of the cross. Is the vertical section is the spine, at least up until here. And then the horizontal section represents the left and the right horizontal lotus petals of the Ida and the Pingala entering in. And of course, the upper portion of the cross is not of the spine, but it's above and out of body. Now, when you look at historical descriptions of Ida and Pingala, something is always the same. The sun is on the left and the moon is on the right. So here we got the sun on the left, the moon on the right. Sometimes it's swapped, but overall, this is how it's depicted. So sun on the left, the moon on the right. Which wasn't the case here, well, except for the sun is on the left and the moon is on the right. But let's take a look at historical paintings of Christ. Here we have Christ, sun on the left, moon on the right. Quite similar to this. And one thing to pay attention to is the moon deity. The moon is not always, but a lot of times it's facing upwards. So typically, Shiva is depicted with that same exact moon. Here's Shiva with the, you could see Shiva's moon. And actually the largest bust in the world, the Adiyogi Shiva statue, has the that same moon shape. Of course, it's on the right side, just like it is here. But anyway, it's just interesting to pay attention to that crescent moon shape. Let's keep looking at some more. Here we go, Christ. Sun on the left, moon on the right, crescent. Here we go. Sun, moon. Now this one isn't necessarily depicting Christ, but we have the cross, sun and moon. I think this one was covered on Ancient Aliens, and they said it's like spaceships or something like that. That's clear air. You can see right here it says Sol and Luna, and that these things coming down are rays of light. And this is the sun, this is the moon. If Ancient Aliens isn't smart enough to figure out that that this on the left and this on the right isn't the sun and the moon, I don't know what to tell you about their research team, but when you find Christ, you're going to find sun on the left, moon on the right. Here's another one. Sun on the left, moon on the right. Now, when those two combine in Golgotha, that's when you enter into the land of milk and honey. So I'm not going to explain too much about the eclipse here. The eclipse, the sun and the moon coming together, is exactly what happens when you go elevate up the 33 into Golgotha, and Pingala and Ida both combine in the pineal gland. You know that this is the sun and the moon combining. In fact, Hatha Yoga literally means sun and moon coming together. Hatha, the word Hatha is the combination of sun and moon. So this word itself is kind of an eclipse because it's Ha or sun and Tha, and it's just moon combined into one. So sun-moon yoga is what that means. Ha, the first syllable of the word Hatha, which is composed of the syllables Ha, meaning the sun, and Tha, meaning the moon. The object of Hatha Yoga is to balance the flow of solar and lunar energy in the human system. And ultimately, the goal of Hatha Yoga is to combine the Ha and the Tha in pineal. So these two combining, of course, create the eclipse. And going back to some historical depictions, we find that this is symbolized again and again. Here, as far back in history as we go, Christ on the cross with the Ha and the Tha, or the Ida and the Pingala. So, of this collection of 10 or 11 paintings, this is the only one that has the moon on the left and the sun on the right. However, that's swapped down here where this guy in red is the sun on the left and the white with the moon on the right. So I can argue that even this one has it correct with the Ha and the Tha. But we can see an obvious match between this human with the Ha and the Tha, or the sun and the moon on the left, and yoga is showing the same exact thing. We have a match as far as this goes when it comes to symbolism between Christ's death and yoga principles. So that covers the cross, and now we've covered the eclipse, the sun and the moon combining in Pingala. According to the Apocalypse of Great Power, which is from the Nag Hammadi, the sun eclipsed, all was darkness. Now, it's starting to add up to the point where I'm saying that this goes beyond the point of coincidence that Christ chose to die on a cross during an eclipse at 33 at Golgotha, where he experienced the death and a rebirth and floated into the sky. Now, the texts say that it's very hard for the yogi in meditation to keep Kundalini in Golgotha. And that normally it only stays there for a very short period of time in meditation, and then it descends back down and coils back up into 3.5 and basically goes back to sleep. Kundalini does not at first stay long in the pineal gland or the third eye chakra. The length of the stay depends on the strength of the yogi's practice. The natural tendency is for Kundalini to return down to the root chakra. The yogi will use all the effort at his disposal to retain her above. For the longer this is done, the nearer approach is made to the time when she can be in a permanent manner retained there. So it says, it's hard to keep Kundalini in that third eye chakra in the land of milk and honey, but a good yogi or a hard practice yogi could keep her there for a long time, or perhaps in a permanent manner retained there. And it says here, on one great power, or siddhi, is had by the man who can keep Kundalini in the pineal gland for 3 days and 3 nights. So here is one reference to the 3 days and the 3 nights, and that the purpose of Hatha Yoga is to raise Kundalini up 33 into Golgotha, where the sun and the moon eclipse or combine together in the pineal gland, and generally it tries to slip back down to its resting place, but the accomplished yogi will keep it here for 3 days and 3 nights. The next one here is floating into the sky. This is so common that it has its own Wikipedia page. It's called the Ascension of Jesus. I can't talk right. This is so common that it has its own Wikipedia page. It's called the Ascension of Jesus. And there's all kinds of biblical accounts. Various episodes refer to the ascension without specific details, but they all say the same thing. They all basically say that after his resurrection, the disciples seen him, and then he floated up into the clouds, essentially floated into the sky. So when you have raised Ida and Pingala up 33 into Golgotha, that's when you ascend from the 6th to the 7th chakra. And the 7th chakra is not in the skull, it's above the skull. And again, this 7th chakra or samadhi would have been the state that Lazarus was in. He was not, he was no longer in his body, he had left his body. And every time you find accounts of this, it's the same, that the yogi floats into the sky. And it's not that he's physically floating into the sky, but your consciousness it floats into the sky. So normally you see your consciousness through your 2 eyeballs, and it's stuck in the skull. And in meditation, that goes away because your eyes are generally closed, and when you do this, you essentially go out of body. Maybe what they would call astral projecting, And that feeling is always a feeling of floating into the sky. The autobiography of Yogi Paramasana, the levitating saint. I saw a yogi remain in the air several feet above the ground last night at a group meeting. How does he remain in the air? Defying the law of gravitation. A yogi's body loses its grossness after the use of certain pranayamas. Then it will levitate or hop about like a leaping frog. Even saints who do not practice a formal yoga have been known to levitate during a state of intense devotion to God. But according to Gopni Krishna, it's some kind of a rope trick or an illusion. And he says that spiritual teachers do not fly in the air. At least that's what the Persian proverb says. It's their disciples who make them fly. In fact, it is the flavor of the supernatural and the miraculous that endears such narratives to a large class of readers of the occult. And not only the occult, but the Bible itself, for Jesus is a spiritual leader who flew into the air. The wise man who always contemplates on this Mulahar obtains Dori Soviti, the frog jump power, and by degrees he can altogether leave the ground, i.e., rise into the air. When your body becomes light like air, when you have a balanced mind in perturbed condition, when you possess inexhaustible energy for work, know that Kundalini has become active. My whole being was so engrossed in contemplation of the lotus that for several minutes at a time I lost touch with my body and surroundings. During such intervals, I used to feel as if I were poised in mid-air, without any feeling of a body around me. So having known that Jesus floated into the sky, studying all of this various yoga texts, they all said the same thing. They all said that basically the seventh chakra, the yogi experiences what he perceives is floating into the sky, or maybe quite literally, he is, his soul or spirit is floating into the sky. Suddenly, with a roar like that of a waterfall, I felt a stream of liquid light entering my brain through the spinal cord. The illumination grew brighter and brighter, and the roaring louder. I experienced a rocking sensation and then felt myself slipping out of my body, entirely enveloped into a halo of light. I felt a point of consciousness that was myself growing wider, surrounded by waves of light. It grew wider and wider, spreading outward, while the body, normally the immediate object of its perception, appeared to have receded into the distance until I became entirely unconscious of it. I knew myself to be a small point of awareness confined in a body, but instead I was a vast circle of consciousness in which the body was but a point, bathed in light, in a state of exaltation and happiness impossible to describe. So that element of the death and the resurrection is definitely recorded as a part of this experience of raising the Kundalini from the root chakra to the pineal, where then it, your spirit floats into the sky. To be honest, I think that Kundalini would stay, or the Holy Spirit would stay in the body, and that your spirit would leave. And then basically what's described in the yoga text is that you merge with or unite with God. And that's the meaning of the word yoga, is to unite with God. A simple definition of yoga is found in the Bhagavad Gita, where it's described as equanimity of mind and thought and deed, resulting in efficiency of action done as service dedicated to God. From the definition given above, we can see that yoga means the union or the linking together of man with God. What does yoga mean? The yoga word is derived from the Sanskrit word yug, meaning to yoke or to unite. The practice aims to create a union between man and God. In Matthew 11:29, Jesus said, "Take up my yoke and learn from me." That is the exact meaning of yuj. In fact, the word Christ would have used, we're not quite sure, it probably would have been in Aramaic, but in Greek, the one written down as zugos, which is derived from yug, and the words yoga, jugular, juxtaposition, joust, zygote, bear different meanings, but they all derive from yug. So I'm not sure if Jesus said, take up my yoke and learn from me, or take up my yoga and learn from me. But essentially, they mean the same thing, because a yoke with Christ is yoga. It's a union between man and Jesus. But moving down the list, we have the crown of thorns. And the thorn I don't have a specific answer for, but historically this is always called the crown chakra. So the fact that Christ is on the cross, and not only that, that the top of the cross, this top portion, is the crown chakra. And essentially where Christ's head would be at, that is where the crown of thorns exists. Again, I don't have a match for the thorn, but the crown is located right there at the crown chakra. So I know he's the king of the Jews and he needs a crown and all this, but the fact of the matter is we have a cross shape with the first 5 chakras being the lower portion of the cross, the 6th chakra being the horizontal section of the cross, and the 7th chakra being the crown, which is physically exactly where the crown of thorns was located at. I don't think it's an accident. Now, Zechariah 4. Okay, Zechariah 4. I need to take away a couple of layers here. Let's get away Ida. Well, hang on. I'm going to turn on Ida and Pingala, and now I'm going to turn on Shushumna, which is the golden path, or what the Bible calls the golden candlestick. This is probably the yellow brick road and all that stuff, but in alchemy you have the red and the white, which the Ida and the Pingala are always red and white, which transmute into gold, or Shushumna, the golden path, which goes straight up the spine. The golden path is the path that Kundalini takes. You can see they're the same color. What I have read in old yoga texts is that when you elevate Ida and Pingala up the 33 vertebrae into Golgotha, where they pour or drip into the pineal gland and mix together, the sun and the moon eclipsing or mixing, that point, the Kundalini will spring forth from the root chakra. And it, the Holy Spirit, shoots straight up the golden path. It doesn't follow the zigzag path. It goes straight up Shushumna. And then it actually, and I guess this is where I get that Kundalini leaves the body, is that they say that Shushumna goes to the 7th chakra. So basically at this point, it would be outside of the human body. And this is where Lazarus is in peril, because if he's lost and he doesn't get back into his body, his physical body is going to die. And that's why Jesus had to direct him back into his body. But that central channel is called Shushumna, and it's referred to as the golden path or the golden candlestick. An angel woke me up from my sleep and said, "What do you see?" I said, "I see a solid gold lampstand with the bowl at the top and 7 lamps on it." Okay, 7 lamps. each chakra is described as a light. Each chakra is described as a light. So we have 7 lamps, and there's the golden lampstand with 7 channels on the lamps, and there were 2 olive trees by it, one on the right and one on the left. Okay, so the 2 olive trees, okay, we've got one on the right and one on the left. That's the Ida and the Pingala. And I asked him, my lord, what are these? You don't know what they are? No. What are you, mighty mountain? Mighty mountain. Oh, that's interesting. That's Mount Meru, or what they call in Sanskrit, Meru Danda, or the spine. Here in the alchemical, to view as one what nature hath wed is our mountain, most masterfully hid. Our mountain. So anyways, that, what are you, mighty mountain? The hands of Zebriel laid the foundation of this temple. This temple is the temple of your head. And I asked the angel, what are the 2 olive trees on the right and the left of the lampstand? What are the Ida and the Pingala on the right and the left of Shishumna? What are the 2 olive branches beside the 2 gold pipes that pour out golden oil? That's exactly what's described, is that one of these oils is white, the other is golden, or perhaps they become golden when they mix. I have purposely reproduced this verse from a work more than 1,000 years old to show what I am stating is confirmed evidence from the past. The verse mentions the gift of genius, and what is important, the flow of the gleaming radiation and the potent generative fluids from the root chakra, i.e. the reproductive region, to the brain through the spinal cord. The language is metaphoric, but all allusions are clear beyond the least shadow of a doubt. The sparkling radiation is white like snow. Sometimes it is likened to camphor and sometimes to milk. The ambrosia is the nectar-like reproductive secretion which at the highest point of ecstasy pours into the brain with such an intensely pleasurable sensation that even the sexual orgasm pales into insignificance before it. This unbelievably rapturous, this is rapture, by the way. So I'm pretty sure this is the golden lampstand, because what the Vedas and the Upanishads describe is that at the mind's eye is a flame that is lit. So the flame being here, the golden lampstand being here, and the 7 lamps thereupon, with what is called 2 golden pipes that pour out golden oil on the right and the left side. Now, finally, is the death and the rebirth. Death and rebirth was a concept in the Vedas and the Upanishads prior to Christ, and what's described is that basically when Kundalini is gone up 33 into Golgotha, and you've reached the 6th chakra, or perhaps the 7th, I'm not sure which, but basically when you get to the land of milk and honey, what happens is the ego is completely destroyed. It's dealt a shattering blow, and the personality of the person changes completely to where they have unconditional love for all humanity, because they see that because there is a change or a widening in consciousness, and where not only does their consciousness go up above the body and leave the body, but it actually is a small sphere that exists inside of the head normally. And when the consciousness leaves through Kundalini, that sphere widens. And when that sphere widens up to a size that it envelops other human beings, that you have some type of a union with them that goes beyond anything physical. and that you experience basically a consciousness not of one person, but of multiple in a way, and that your consciousness isn't a small pinpoint, but it's a huge sphere. And I assume if you would have elevated Kundalini into Golgotha for 3 days and 3 nights, which I believe goes in conjunction with water fasting, that your consciousness would definitely become quite large, maybe to the size of the entire earth. And anyways, that's what's called in the Upanishads or the Vedas a death and a rebirth, because the person dies and at least the personality dies, the ego experiences a complete death, and the personality becomes one of unconditional love for all humanity, which of course is what Christ had. The genuine mystical experience deals a shattering blow to the ego and melts down the walls that segregate the individual from the rest of his fellow beings. The other element, which I referred to earlier of death and rebirth, is that of the Kundalini leaving the body. Normally, let's say you were to get in a car accident, you would rush towards that bright light, and the Kundalini would leave the body. But and it wouldn't come back in, and the flesh would of course be buried and die. So the other way, of course, through Hatha or Kundalini yoga, is by having Kundalini or the soul, perhaps the spirit, leave the body, and then, as with Lazarus, coming back in. And so if we call Kundalini leaving the body a death, then it coming back in would be a rebirth. This phenomena of transformation or rebirth is alluded to by Christ in metaphorical language in his dialogue with Nicodemus when he says that you must be born again. Among Hindus, the term twice born, applied to the higher castes, is entitled would wear a secret thread with 3 strands symbolic of the 3 nerve channels of Kundalini, or the Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. So this is called Dviaja, and in Sanskrit, it means twice born. So Sanskrit has a word for born again, whereas in English, we don't even have a word for it. We had to use 2 words, and you could see the translation is, even in English, twice born or born again. But Sanskrit, being a much older language than Christ, has a single word for this born again, or twice born, Dviaja. So death and rebirth is a part of this whole process, and it was historically called Dviaja. Sorry, I can't pronounce that. But here we are at the end, and toggling off everything, going back to the very beginning. Here are the elements that Christ decided to include into his death. He decided to die at 33 years, which corresponds to the 33 vertebrae. He decided to die at the skull. He decided to die on a cross, which aligns with the 7 chakras, specifically the 2 lotus petals going horizontally here with the other section here. He decided to say that the Son of Man must raise the serpent of course being Kundalini. In addition to that, he decided to die during an eclipse, when the Ha and the Tha combine in the Anja chakra, turning on the Ida and the Pingala. He decided to die right at the moment when an eclipse happened, when the sun and the moon, or the Pingala and the Ida, combine in the Anja chakra, the 3rd eye chakra. He decided to stay in for 3 days and 3 nights. and he floated into the sky. The same thing that happens here at the seventh chakra, or the crown chakra. He decided to wear a crown at the same location where the crown chakra exists. All of this with the middle channel of Sushumna, or the golden path, is described perfectly in Zechariah 4, and he also decided to experience a death and a rebirth, which is historically what happens when the serpent is raised 33 to Golgotha, or a death of the ego is experienced and a rebirth of the human being, possibly because the Kundalini has left the body has died, and the Kundalini has gone back in, and the person has been reborn. Now, I will mention that the white is obviously the reproductive fluid, and that historically, one of the reasons this is called a rebirth is that the seed is used to create a new man. And that you were born once, but this time the seed has been used to cause the man to be born again spiritually. Now, given that he was the Son of God and had full control over the circumstances surrounding his death, I find it unlikely that he would have incorporated all of these different symbols into his death if he wasn't trying to teach us something. Of course, the best teacher in the world ever would have been Christ Jesus, and he would have known that you don't teach by telling people what to do, you teach by actions. And through his actions, he taught us something very important that the Christian and every church has completely missed. The human child, no doubt, comes into being as a result of a certain biochemical process, but are we in a position to fashion it without the agency of the human seed? The transformation of the brain, leading to transcendental consciousness, needs the superintelligent guiding touch of the living force that is the basis for all phenomena of life. I am a Christian myself, and it seems to me clear that Christ based his teaching on a tradition existing in his time and country, and that tradition originally came from India and is still being followed there, passing from father to son and from guru to chela. As a background to this pervasive peace stood the Himalayas, white and holy, their summits reaching into an afterglow of crimson. That white and the red. Would it be my work, I wondered, to tell the West a little of what may be discovered there, and how Christ himself, through the light of his divinity, upon the truths that were known in the childhood of the Vedas,